Are you looking for a baseball book to read this offseason? Well, if you are, look no further than the Fireballer, which as an Orioles fan is a lot of fun and a lot of fun for every baseball fan. We're going to talk to the author of this book, Mark Stevens, coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Tuesday, November 28th, 2023, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, it's the Locked On Orioles Book Club. Haven't done this in a while, but back in the day, a couple years ago, earlier part of the podcast, we used to talk to authors about books and, baseball books generally. But this one we're going to talk about today is called The Fireballer. It is a novel by Mark Stevens, and it follows a pitcher named Frank Ryder who plays for the Baltimore Orioles and throws 110 miles per hour. He is the best pitcher in baseball. The league's trying to stop him, but also is he being stopped by some demons and some other things in his past? We'll talk about that with Mark Stevens coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast. But first, did want to get into a little bit of news and notes here on the top of the podcast, because although the Orioles haven't made a move since the last time that we talked, there were two major starting pitchers who were signed in free agency on Monday that I wanted to get to real fast, because these were two guys who were both on my top 10 Orioles free agent starting pitching wish list. The first one is Sonny Gray. He was the guy who was number one on my list. And I made my list. I said, anyone who's projected to get less than $100 million, I would put on the list. Now, when I talked about Sonny Gray, I said that, hey, there is a good chance that whatever money he gets, the Orioles are not going to be willing to pay. I believe the projection was around 4 years, $84 million for Sonny Gray. He got less years, but he got more average annual value. Sonny Gray, the 34-year-old right-hander, signed a 3-year, $75 million deal with the St. Louis Cardinals on Monday. And we talked about the Cardinals last week, right? Because they signed Kyle Gibson, also signed Lance Lynn the day before, and chatted about how, they had gotten these two veteran innings eaters that I'm sure the Orioles were looking at this offseason, had brought them in, but the Cardinals really needed to spruce up the top of the rotation too. And we said these moves only make sense if they bring in a top guy. Well, the way he's pitched lately, Sonny Gray is that top guy. And that is why I was so all over the Orioles going after Sonny Gray. In 32 starts this season for the Minnesota Twins, 184 innings, which is the most he had thrown since 2015 in Oakland. He finally was starting to stay healthy. Sonny Gray had a 2.79 ERA, finished second in AL Cy Young Award voting, only behind Garrett Cole. He was unbelievable this season. His sweeper, opponents hit under 100 against it. It was one of the best pitches in all of baseball. 183 strikeouts in 184 innings. He was fantastic. And listen, this was after, he didn't pitch a whole season in 2022, but a 3.08 ERA in 24 starts the year before. So even though he wasn't fully healthy, still had a great year, and he backed it up with an amazing full season, and he's going to get $25 million per year. And I don't think anybody puts Sonny Gray in the same mold as free agents like Aaron Nola, who got more years, more money, less annual value, or guys like Blake Snell, who are out there, or, even a guy like Jordan Montgomery at this point. And Sonny Gray got $25 million per year from the St. Louis Cardinals. I would have loved the Orioles to get Sonny Gray for any cost, but I'll tell you right now, John Angelos isn't paying $25 million per year to any free agent, so that knocked Sonny Gray off the board. But then another guy came off the board that was definitely in the Orioles' price range, and that was Kenta Maeda, who not only did he sign a very reasonable contract, he gets a 2-year, $24 million deal. That's $12 million per year. The Orioles spent $10 million on Kyle Gibson last year. Kenta Maeda is better than Kyle Gibson. He gets $12 million per year. That was certainly in the Orioles' price range. 35-year-old righty who kind of became a free agent for the first time in at least Major League Baseball this year, after a good season with Minnesota. Now, he was coming back from Tommy John surgery. Maeda did not pitch in all of 2022, and he is 35 years old. But, he had a little bit of a shoulder issue as well, or I believe it was a side issue that he dealt with, not a shoulder issue, a side issue, my mistake. He was coming off the Tommy John, but once he finally got healthy in the second half of the season, he ended up throwing 104 and a third innings and had a 4.23 ERA, but he had an ERA around 3 in the last couple months of the year once he was finally fully healthy for the Twins last season. And it is interesting that both of these guys pitched for the Twins last year and is each signed elsewhere in the same day. And you don't know if Maeda can, really eat innings for you, right? He's coming off of Tommy John. His inning counts in his career, the most he'd ever thrown was his first year after coming over from Japan. He threw 176 innings for the Dodgers in 2016. He only capped 150 innings one other time. That was in 2019. Then we had COVID season. Then he threw 106, got injured, missed a year, and threw 104. So he's not the innings eater you want, but on a per inning basis, he's got good stuff and he gets guys out. He is still a good Major League Baseball pitcher. And I felt like for a 2-year, $24 million deal, the O's could have been in on that. Instead, he signs with the Detroit Tigers, who are showing once again that they are trying to, add to the blocks they have, the base of this team, and compete in what's going to be a very, very weak AL Central in 2024. So good on the Tigers for still going for it once again. And I don't think Maeda was going to be the Orioles' top option, but Maeda could have been a perfect guy who you sign as your number 4 or 5, and then you maybe go trade for more of a number 1 or 2 starter. That would have been a good offseason. Seems like it's not, but at least the Maeda deal tells me that there are affordable options for the Orioles out there. I could totally see the Orioles signing someone else to a similar deal, a 2-year, $24 million deal, and know that a pitcher as solid as Maeda is going for that means the O's could still be in play for some starting pitchers this offseason. And then finally, the other piece of news that came out on Monday, the Braves are reportedly in trade talks with the Chicago White Sox for Dylan Cease. I've talked about it. This is the number 1 guy the Orioles should be targeting in trade. The Braves have a lot to give up. The Orioles have a better farm system, but the Braves have a lot. Hopefully the O's get on that. The report said that many other teams are talking to the White Sox about him, but the Braves were the top team named. We shall see how that goes. But those are all the news and notes, at least for now. Of course, the winter meetings next week, things will really pick up. But for now, we're going to dive into the Locked On Orioles book club. And coming up after the break, we're going to talk to Mark Stevens. He is the author, again, of The Fireballer, a great novel that kind of surrounds the Orioles, Baltimore, baseball itself, and it is much more than that, too. It was a great, great read. You should check it out. And of course, after you hear this interview, you're really going to want to read this one. That is coming up after the break. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Now, the NFL season is here, and you can score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 just if your team wins. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, so we welcome in Mark Stevens on today's episode. He is the author of The Fireballer, a fantastic book that I just finished that we're going to talk about today, but also an author in general and a baseball fan. That is why he is here today. And Mark, first of all, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Connor, thanks a million for having me.
So, we're here to talk about the book, The Fireballer, which came out earlier this year. And I know we had talked a little bit about maybe chatting during the season. And I said, you know what, for my podcast, the off season is really the best time to do this. And I've had some authors on before, but this is the first time we've talked about a fiction book. But obviously this kind of surrounds the Orioles in ways which we will get into. But first, I wanted to ask you, where does your baseball fandom kind of start from? And where is your baseball fandom now at this point in 2023?
Great question. Well, it started outside Boston. That's where I grew up. I'm a Red Sox fan from about age 9 on. Total Red Sox fan. Sorry, Orioles. I do love the Orioles, especially the latest rendition. Just in quick sort of overview fashion, having grown up a Red Sox fan, my career took me to Denver and became a Rockies fan. I was a reporter actually with the newspaper in Denver when the Rockies franchise started out there and covered opening day of their very first inaugural season, and have been following the Rockies ever since. I think it's interesting to watch a team get put together and grow and see where they went. I mean, the Rockies are an interesting story, and I think they're an interesting story in comparison to the Orioles too, in terms of just a team, in my mind, the Rockies, who have not put a plan together the way the Orioles have. But just quickly, I want to say, I mean, all along, even growing up as a Red Sox fan, I always thought the Orioles were a super classy team. The old days of Jim Palmer, Brooks Robinson, right on through the Cal Ripken era, everything. I just thought they were really a classy and interesting team. And so, I mean, I'm sure we'll get into it, but when it came time to choosing a team for the book, the Orioles seemed like a great fit.
Yeah, that was going to be actually my next question. You know, Frank Ryder, who pitches for the Orioles in your book, The Fireballer. And I know, as you mentioned, I'd read about you as well, and you talk about it, you know, in the book too. You know, grew up a Red Sox fan. You have the connections to the Rockies. So what made you land specifically on the Orioles for really the team that this character, this book was going to be somewhat based around?
Yeah. Well, I started writing it before the National League went designated hitter. So at the time, I wanted to go with a team where Frank would be both pitching and hitting, which meant, I knew he would be an American League pitcher because in the story I wanted to open with in Chicago on the road, he would have to be forced to hit. He'd have to be forced to take a swing at the plate. And of course, now that's not an actual option. But the other real main reason I chose Baltimore, other than the fact that they were the worst team at the time and had the number one pick, and Frank Ryder, being what he is as a pitcher, was the obvious, over no questions asked, number one pick of the draft that year. I really like the character of the city of Baltimore. Again, I've always thought it was a really cool, interesting town. And Frank Ryder's overall situation as a character seemed to line up really well with Baltimore. And I, as an outsider, shouldn't pretend I know the character of Baltimore, but I know its reputation and some of its challenges. And I thought it would be a really good character fit for Frank.
Yeah, I think there's not like, you know, it's not like in every chapter there's, you know, Baltimore imagery. You know, there's obviously much more centers around Frank's story, but there are these little Easter eggs in here that I think like people like me, grew up in the area, currently live in the city, appreciated while reading the book. And I think other Orioles fans and Baltimore natives will too. What was kind of the process of, you know, you've grown up around baseball, admiring the Orioles, but, you know, not, you know, a native of the city from the state of Maryland. Like, what was the process going into, okay, who do I talk to? How much research do I do for, you know, some of these things that are based specifically to Baltimore? For example, the one I liked is just Olivia playing at UMBC. And I just love the little nugget in there of UMBC. It's a school that got on the map a little bit a couple of years ago from basketball, but generally not a school that many people know. But if you're from the area, you immediately recognize the Retrievers. So kind of what went into that part of the research of the book?
Yeah, thanks for that. And actually, I was just in Baltimore in April, went to a Orioles Red Sox game, and had a friend, and we drove up to UMBC. And I hadn't actually driven by that field where she, the fictional character, played, but it was fun to see it in person. To answer your question, I mean, having been writing novels for a while now, you know, it just comes down to research. It comes down to asking friends to poke around. I actually had a friend of a friend who had access to, as a reporter and some other media adjacent jobs, had been inside some of the Baltimore Orioles executives' offices, had been in the clubhouse enough that I could ask, which way does the hall go down to the manager's office? Just little kind of details that I felt I needed to know. As far as some of the bars or scenes around Baltimore, there's always YouTube, there's always the good old internet, the World Wide Web. And I knew that if I found some detail I wanted to use, I'd make sure, A, that it was still there, and B, I would never go too far. I would just use what I needed to use to illustrate, decorate the story, and try not to overdo it, pretending I knew every little inch of space inside, like inside of a bar. Most people, when you say we're inside a certain bar, they can picture it.
Right. Yeah. And I know you talked about some of the baseball fandom. I'm sure that went into, you know, writing a baseball book, but I know previously had been a lot of mystery novels that you had written. So was there something about, you know, the general story here, not just the baseball of it, that made you want to write what, you know, I would call a baseball book? This isn't just a hardline, you know, baseball book that might be like behind me on my baseball shelf. Like, I think I got the a baseball almanac from a couple from the 90s. This is obviously not that, but what kind of made you to take that step to write a baseball book that obviously has many more themes, but is surrounding the world of baseball?
Yeah. I mean, the answer to that is I was just intrigued by the idea that came to me for the plot, which was the idea of a pitcher throwing so fast that there's no time left for a batter to swing. And that core concept just grabbed me. As any novelist, you want that core idea to grab you because you know you're going to be spending a couple years living and breathing in that concept. And so when I did come across it, a friend actually planted the initial seed. I was, on one side, really intrigued to attempt to write a baseball novel. But on the other side, I'd only ever written straight up crime fiction. I'd only ever written mysteries with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Some bad guy who's going to be chased down and prosecuted by a detective or something. And I lived and breathed in the world of crime fiction. So coming out of that to write a regular novel was daunting. But nonetheless, I knew I just needed to keep the tension up there, keep the reader interest going, keep the reader curiosity going. And I do think some of my crime fiction experience helped. And then it was just a matter of saying, okay, what do I need from the baseball world to really feel like I can write about it comfortably? And that, again, is that back to that research thing. And I, at one point, thought about going down to spring training and really trying to embed myself with a team like the Rockies. I had some connections. I thought I might be able to do that. But then realized, you know what? I've seen a lot of baseball. YouTube has every variety of interview in every single setting you can possibly imagine. There have been books and profiles, and now there's, like you say, I mean, we could all read a book a day of nothing but baseball memoirs for the next 10 years and never finish. It's all out there. We just need to go get exactly what you need to get and pull it into your work.
Yeah, of course. I did want to ask, a little bit more about like the character Frank Ryder and what he's facing. The gist of the book here is he throws 110 miles per hour. It's something we haven't seen yet in Major League Baseball. But I was wondering, as a baseball fan, someone who's covering the game and is into the game every single day throughout a 162 game season, and you write a little bit about this in the epilogue of the book about how, this is a very much changing world of Major League Baseball. You talked about the DH a little bit as well. We've got the runner on second in extra innings now. The somewhat ban of the shift. There are different rules that are coming in, and that is a theme of this book as well. Like, does there need to be a rule about guys not throwing 110? That's not something specifically that I think has gotten fully into the ether yet. But we're seeing guys throw hard enough where I wouldn't be surprised if in 5, 10, 15, 20 years that starts to come up. How much of this was influenced by, when you look at Major League Baseball, in our world right now, rules are changing because they're trying to tinker with the game because of how much, I'll just say, like, better, more prepared, more physically dominant the players are today.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the issue with baseball right now. And wow, what a fascinating season this was to watch all those rule changes manifest themselves in the game and how we really saw a different brand of baseball. It may be a minor change in some ways. The casual observer might not say that watching a game on television was all that much different, but if you're a close observer, it's really changed the dynamics and just the speed. The base stealing stuff alone, I think, has made the game a lot more interesting. I just think that at some point, the whole notion of baseball is built around failure. You can be a multi-millionaire, and 7 out of 10 times you go up to the plate to do what you're hired to do, you fail. And at the rate these pitchers are throwing, 100 miles an hour is no big deal anymore. It's fun to watch. And announcers comment when a pitcher is routinely hitting 102, 103, 104, that is really a dazzling sight to see. But what the hitter is faced with doing in 0.3 seconds, deciding whether to swing, how to swing, where to swing, that is, you can admire the pitcher's ability and say, wow, it's enjoyable. If he's your guy and he's striking him out, hey, he's on my side, and I've got a fireballer, on my team who can knock these guys down. I think that's highly entertaining. But I think the average sports fan out there wants to see action, wants to see the ball in play. And that's, I think, what baseball in general, the consensus is among those who are guiding the game and making decisions. They are also trying to get more runners on base and more balls out in the field. Yeah.
I do want to ask, kind of coming off of that, is, as you're writing the book, as you're going through drafts and redrafts and you're having other people take a look at certain chapters and certain passages, how much do you go back and forth about, how much actual baseball is too much baseball in a book like this, right? Because there is a love story in here, right? There is the story of someone's troubled past, and there are a lot of characters who are, some of them also outside the baseball realm, that are in this book. So how did you kind of parse through that as you write the book? It's clearly a baseball book, but it is also about much more than that. So how did you kind of parse through that?
Yeah. Well, my great question. Very good question. When I first called my agent, bounced this idea off him, guy named Josh Getzler, a fabulous literary agent in New York. I ran the idea by him, and unbeknownst to me, he casually said, well, by the way, I used to be the chief operating officer for the Staten Island Yankees, the minor league team for the Yankees. So the guy knew baseball, and he's an excellent literary agent. He loved the whole concept for the book. And he said something almost right away. He said, this book it can't be only about baseball. It's got to be about something else. And then you read other books, other novels about baseball. And I'll tell you, this is sort of sounds like a little loosey-goosey kind of mystical thing to say, but sometimes when you're reading another book about baseball, another novel, it's almost like you can feel that the author is trying too hard to manipulate the game and manipulate the situations. And of course, that is the case. The author is manipulating the situation when you're writing a novel. But I just sort of tried to play for that balance of not showing my hand too much, trying to make it feel like an organic situation. And I knew that the baseball, had to be, I don't know, there was no exact formula you could put on it, like make sure it's only a quarter of the entire book or a fifth, but I just knew it couldn't get bogged down in runners on base and throwing, here's this strike and here's a ball. I don't know. It was a hard thing to argue. And some people who've read it wanted more baseball. And I can tell you some people wanted less. So, you just do your best, drive the story.
Right. I did want to, also ask what kind of your reaction was to the fact, and you talk about it a little bit already, how, the Orioles fit because they did have the number one pick for a couple of years, and Frank Ryder is the number one pick. He is the slam dunk number one pick, and he is basically right in the major leagues helping turn the Orioles around. What was your reaction to kind of, yes, the Orioles in 2022 had a good season and started their turnaround, but the true, this team has arrived happens the season basically that your book comes out about the Orioles turning things around and arriving, and the city of Baltimore once again rallying around them. What was your reaction to that? I'm sure a couple months into this season, you realize this is kind of happening like in the book. I mean, even the Orioles have a number one pick in Adley Rutschman, who was helping them do that entire turnaround.
I was tweeting about it and remarking on it and feeling it, making posts about it. It was stunning. It was so cool. And I think, as sports fans, that's what we want out of a team, is at least some idea that we, as a team, have an agenda. We have a plan. We know where we're going to put our cards. We're going to bolster the pitching. We're going to pick up on the hitting, whatever it is. Here are the problems we see with our team. Here's how we're going to fix them, and here's how we're going to go. And I think with the arrival of Rutschman that year, I mean, the Orioles record since he showed up is just amazing. It's, what a force he is. And 2022 was fantastic. The book comes out in December of last year on ebook anyway. It came out officially on January 1st. And then to watch 2023 roll out was just a dream. Gosh, if only they'd been able to, win a playoff game or two or three, of course. And
would have been nice.
I really thought that they were the Diamondback. I predicted the Diamondbacks actually early on in the playoffs would be trouble. And I thought the Orioles were going to be the American League East version of the Diamondbacks. Nobody would see them coming because they were a feisty up and coming team, and 2024 will be it.
Yeah. This team in real life probably does need maybe I don't know if a Frank Ryder exists, but a number one pitcher is the next thing that I'm sure this team is definitely looking for. I do want to ask also, this might be a very simple answer from you, but this is kind of also the baseball nerd in me in reading the book, how, all of the other Orioles players were fictional names of fictional players, the people who worked in the front office. But on the flip side, when you talk about the history of the team, it is the mentions of the Franks Robinsons, the Brooks Robinsons, the Cal Ripkens. And also you have some people elsewhere in the league, like I know Aaron Judge is mentioned at one point that do exist in this timeline essentially, but Joe Torre is mentioned as well. But there are others like the commissioner is not Rob Manfred and all the other owners. What was the decision making there? Is it a kind of a simple answer or something a little deeper about who's in the book, who's in real life, and who's not?
There was a kind of a simple rule when it came to the players and a little bit more complicated rule when it came to the owners. So real quickly on the players, we decided, my agent and I, that contemporary players of Frank Ryder's, if we put in, Adley Rutschman or Mullins or anybody from the current team, there could easily be a trade, there could be some sort of injury, something that causes that person to not be there. Other players of note, Aaron Judge, his legacy is not going anywhere. Mentioning really well-known players and their affiliation wasn't as big a risk in that situation. Players of the past, we wanted to ground it in real baseball history. So mentioning Jim Palmer's and Boog Powell's, et cetera, not a big problem there. When it came to the owners, we immediately decided we could not try to use actual owners. I went with a variety of styles of owners and fictionalize them. But I think there were some concerns about trying to get too close to describing all these different businessmen and their varieties of businesses. And it just felt like we needed to give the Orioles a fictional owner and all those decisions and choices that fictional owner would face, and then just collectively grasp the entire spectrum of styles of ownership that are out there.
Yeah, and I enjoyed that because you got the little taste of okay, this is, as you said, kind of grounded in the baseball history. We know this is Major League Baseball. You still kind of got those little nuggets everywhere. I did want to ask, Frank Ryder such a goes through a lot of changes in this book, and you can kind of see the character arc. If you had any of the other characters in the book, I wouldn't say lesser characters, but this main character is Frank Ryder in this book that you really enjoyed writing their stories. For me, I believe it was Aiko, the assistant of the Orioles owner. I kind of liked the role that she played as kind of the grounding force for him, and somewhat of a side character who played a bigger role as the book went on. I was wondering if you had anyone when you were done, when it released, when you were like, what, that character whose journey was not felt in every single chapter, that you were really proud of or really enjoyed writing.
Yeah, Aiko is one for sure. Ray Gallo's assistant, and she's Japanese heritage, but American all the way through. And I think she brings a sort of a different edge and angle and analysis to all that's going on around Ray and herself. She's sort of a gentle agitator in some ways. I think she would be a great character, and it's fun as a fan to see female executives come up in the business. So yeah, her, and I just think the relationship that Frank has with his brother Josh, I think, following a struggling minor league catcher up through the ranks, maybe you could have written this whole story from Josh's perspective, because he was there on that fateful, tragic day as well. And of course, it would have been a completely different story, but I think you could tell a lot of the same story through his twin brother Josh's perspective as well. It just wouldn't be without all the limelight and kind of commotion that Frank is causing by just through what Frank can do and what he's capable of bringing to the game, this existential question of whether the game can sustain that kind of athletic talent.
Yeah, I think, the pitch for me to Orioles fans listening who, might want to check out this book again, The Fireballer, is First of all, the number one thing is you get to, read about the Orioles having some success. I think that is the number one thing for Orioles fans that they enjoy, but also a great book. And as I mentioned, some nuggets about Baltimore, about the city, about the Major League Baseball as well. But Mark, before we go, I just wanted to give you a chance to give a little final elevator pitch, if you wanted to, for anyone who hasn't checked out the book, and then let them know where they can find it if this episode has convinced them that the Fireballer is their next read.
Yeah, well, thanks very much again. I would just say, as you have mentioned, it is a book set in the world of baseball, but it is very much about, I think, a real human being. It's a very, I hope, human story, human journey. It is about mental health, and it's about, in that sense, it touches on something that we're seeing a lot in professional sports discussion from Simone Biles and lots of other stories about athletes who are dealing with the state of their mind and how it affects their ability on the field. And the Fireballer gets into some of that, and it is a love story. So I think there's enough different threads in there for readers to find a way into the story, even if they don't like baseball. And there are tons of reviews online that begin with, "I don't even like baseball, but I love this book." So I appreciate anybody picking it up. I'm at writermarkstevens.com. I'm on basically, if you put in the Fireballer, my name, it'll pop right up. It's done very well. I'm very happy with how it's done the first just about a year now. So should be easy to find.
And again, the book is The Fireballer. Mark, thank you so much once again for joining us. And we hope the success the Orioles see in this book is the success they see coming up in 2024.
Thanks, Connor, and go O's.
So our thanks again to Mark Stevens, the author of The Fireballer, for joining us to talk about his book. Again, you can get this thing wherever you get your books. Again, the title is The Fireballer, and Orioles fans, you're going to like reading this one because at the very base level, there is some fun Orioles success to read about in this book. But we will be back tomorrow on the pod, jumping back into our Orioles 2023 player season review series. Nick Stevens of the On the Verge podcast is going to join us on tomorrow's episode. We're going to review two interesting seasons. One, Anthony Santander, and the other, Heston Kjerstad, coming up on tomorrow's episode. Talk about Santander, where he fits in. Will he stay with the O's long term? Could he be traded? And then Kjerstad, what his role could be in potentially his first full season in 2024. And finally, can those two, with them being so similar in production and position, can they coexist on the roster next season? We'll talk about that coming up on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.